The word initiation means to initiate, to begin something new, or to take an initiative. There are many examples of initiation in everyday life. Birth is an initiation, going to school is an initiation, getting married is an initiation, moving out of your parents' home is an initiation. There's all kinds of initiations that we go through. But in the occult, initiation takes on a more mysterious tone. But it really still means the same thing. It means entering a new level of life, a new way of being. From my perspective, initiation is something that we go through when we leave an old way of thinking and an old way of behaving spiritually in favor of something new. We learn new principles. We learn new knowledge. We gain a higher mental and sometimes material status as a result of that. Occult means hidden. So an occult initiation usually means that you start to experience knowledge, practices, and ways of living and being that are hidden to most people. And this is why sometimes occult initiations devolve into elitism. A lot of people believe that initiation means initiation only into a particular group, into a particular school. And a lot of times people think initiation is a ceremony. Now, there are initiation ceremonies you can go through, but the initiation ceremony, if it's a real initiation, is the beginning of a new way of life, a new way of being, a new way of operating, a new way of seeing yourself in the world. With some of these organizations, you pay a fee, you go through an initiation ceremony, and that's it. Some of these schools then also teach you from there. But if the initiation is seen as being something magical that happens from the ceremony and not something that happens as a result of you living and practicing with this new knowledge and new way of operating, then it's not really an initiation. You don't need to necessarily be initiated into the Golden Dawn. You don't necessarily need to be initiated into a witchcraft tradition. You don't necessarily need to be initiated into a lodge in order to receive an occult initiation. The true initiation, even if you do those things, doesn't happen from those people. The true initiation happens as a result of you changing your thinking, changing your behavior, and changing your understanding. And then living with those new understandings, living with those new changes. That's an initiation. If you are undergoing an occult initiation, you'll know that because you don't see things the same way that you used to see things. You don't approach problems the same way that you used to approach problems. You have a new way of looking at things. And as a result of that, especially at the beginning, but sometimes it can happen even at the so-called advanced degrees of initiation, there is frequently a pushback from the old mind, from the old way of doing things, from the status quo. And that's why a lot of times you hear of people taking an initiation and then their life seems to fall apart. It's not that the initiation caused their life to fall apart. It's just that they are coming to an understanding that their life was never all that together to begin with. Instead of using all of their energy trying to hold an illusion together that doesn't serve them, the initiation brings a new way of looking at things, a new way of behaving, a new way of seeing things, and also, as a result, new desires. What you want is different than what you used to want. And so frequently, the old life, if it didn't coincide with your new objectives, needs to die away. Very much like the caterpillar dies away in favor of the butterfly. The hull of the seed dies away in favor of the new plant growing from the earth. And if your tendency is to mourn the loss of your old life, then you're not really understanding the initiation to begin with. And what happens is frequently people say, oh, no, I don't want that. And they try to go back. They try to go back to their old lives, but then their old ways don't satisfy them. They can't be comfortable in their old ways anymore because they've seen something beyond. They've seen something beyond the veil. When you are willing to initiate onto the path, onto the way, There can be many different methods and means, and it can take all kinds of different forms depending on you and your situation, your circumstance, your history. But when you're ready to initiate, the universe is there to initiate you. And nothing happens to you against your will, even though sometimes it can seem that way. But on some level, you've said, yeah, bring it on. Bring it on. I want this. A lot of people look at initiation as being a new birth. And that's a good way of looking at it, being born again. Christians don't own that concept, and they don't own that term. And in fact, a lot of the born-againness of that religion isn't what we're talking about when we're talking about initiation. It can be, depending on the person. But really what being born again means is that you are changing from one form to another. And you can seem so different, just like the butterfly seems so different than the caterpillar. The oak tree seems so different than the little acorn. The tomato vine seems so different from that little fleck of a tomato seed. And that's what an initiation is. But just like with a physical birth, it can be traumatic. And some births are more traumatic than others. And so when you're having that second birth, or when you're having that initiation into your spirit, into your new life, into the occult mysteries, into the truth of who you are as a soul rather than who you think you are as an ego, you do oftentimes have some trauma. But the trauma doesn't have to be there. The first birth that we have, the physical birth that we have, is traumatic for the body, for both the mother and the child. But our mother in the second birth, in the initiation, is Shekinah, is the divine mother. And she doesn't go through trauma. And you don't have to go through trauma either, because it's not designed to be traumatic for you. But to the degree you hang on to your old life that doesn't belong anymore in the new you, that's where the trauma exists. That's what many of the apocalyptic type authors in the old traditions were talking about. Even that apocalyptic book in the Bible, the book of Revelation, it really is discussing an initiation. The tension involved in the visions of that book are the tensions of letting go of an old you in favor of the new you. The old egoic you, the earthly you, in favor of the true you, the soul. The fact that we were born into this world of separation, and then we, as postulates of initiation, have decided we want to rise again to our truth, rise again into who we are as souls, and understand things from a higher perspective than what we are taught here, deciding that, wanting that, asking for that as postulates, we get what we ask for. And so then when things start to get scary for us, what is smart for us to do is to remind ourselves what we're going through. Are we hanging on to the old, or are we letting go of the old in favor of the new? Because the truth about a true occult initiation is on the other side of that veil, on the other side of that initiation, is the power over this world. We have all power over this world. We have powers that are dormant, just like the caterpillar doesn't have the wings to fly yet. They're dormant in the caterpillar. The tomato seed isn't going to feed a family until it goes through that change, and then there's going to be plenty of tomatoes to feed a family. Not only are there going to be tomatoes to feed a family, but there are going to be more seeds within each of those tomatoes to feed family after family after family after family. And this is the same for us in a way, in that we are being initiated from the mortal to the immortal, from the limited into the eternal. And as we go through our initiations, we must accept our power. And it sounds fun when you think of it, like, oh, I get all my power, yay. But the resistance to receiving our power is profound. It's very challenging for most people to let go of the old, to let go of the caterpillar, to let go of the seed hull, to let go of the old way in favor of the new, because that takes a lot of faith. But what happens is when you're going through an initiation, you'll know you're going through an initiation because you feel different. You see things in a new way. And then within that comes a lot of fear about letting go of the old ways of seeing things in favor of the new ways. What we go through is having to assess the perfection of the universe, the patterns of the universe. The tomato doesn't have to will itself to become a tomato plant. The caterpillar doesn't have to will itself to become a butterfly, but it has to allow it. There's a wave of determination that comes over the tomato seed, that comes over the caterpillar, that enables those things to happen through them. And the same thing goes with us. We're not initiating ourselves. We are being initiated through spirit to go from one reality into the other. But you don't go back. You don't go back. And so to be afraid is to stop having faith in the perfection of all the systems of the universe. Just like the tomato will grow, the butterfly will arise, so too will you arise as the perfected soul that you are. When we are able to look at the perfection in all the systems of the universe, then we can have the same faith that the perfection in the system of our own initiation knows what it's doing as well. Once we get that conviction, we no longer fight the initiation process, and then that trauma disappears. And then what we have to learn how to do is live in the world and understand that the world that we see is illusory, in that we can't judge what's in front of us by how it looks. Because once you're an initiate, you understand, yes, I see a computer screen, but behind that computer screen is just waves of energy. If I'm looking at it as an initiate, I'm looking at the fact that it's not what I think it is. It's just a bunch of molecules that are vibrating in order for me to have this experience of computer screen. But that ultimately, that's not what that is. Ultimately, that isn't a book. Ultimately, that isn't a piano. Ultimately, that isn't a keyboard. Ultimately, that is not a wall. These are not the structures that they appear to be. And once we can understand how to look at the world as an initiate, that's when we have power over the world. And it's not power over the world that's personal power anymore, because we've come to understand as initiates that there is no such thing as personal power. Yes, we are individuals. Yes, we have our own individual soul print. We are our own unique expressions of the divine, but it's not personal. There's no place where I start and you stop. I don't have a mind all of my own. I'm thinking with the same mind as everybody else. But pre-initiate, before I'm initiated into that mystery, I think everything that I have is private. My mind is private, my life is private, my personality is private, everything's private. Everything's walled off. I believe in everything that I see out in the world. I do believe that I'm victimized by the universe. I do believe that I'm a speck of nothing, and that I have to increase my personal power in order to protect myself from the hard, cruel world that's all about me. Whereas as an initiate, we look at those same circumstances and we say, those aren't what they appear to be. That's just an illusion. Everything's malleable. And as long as I'm working within what we call our sphere of influence, I have power over those things. And ultimately, as I move forward in my initiation, as I get higher and higher degrees of initiation, I have power over more and more things. Universal power. The infinite wants us to have power over these things. That's the whole reason for being initiated, so that we can understand who we really are. Once you're initiated, you don't see yourself as a small little thing, small little seed, a small little caterpillar. Once you're initiated, you realize, whoa, I'm different than I thought I was. And that's because you are different. You are different, and you can't go back. There is not one butterfly that can become a caterpillar again. It's impossible. There is no way that plant can suck itself back into the seed. There's more seeds. There's more caterpillars that'll come, but you can't undo your initiation. There is no such thing as being initiated and then just saying, just kidding. Oh, never mind. I don't want this. Once it's there, it's there. Once you're initiated, that's it. And then it's up to you whether you want to resist and thus increase your trauma of the experience, or if you want to embrace your expansion and realize that trauma is not a part of it. The only trauma is the ego trying to hang on and trying to go backwards. When people talk to you about initiation, understand that many of them don't know what they're talking about. And we're not saying that to criticize them. It's just that they've been poorly informed. Occult initiation happens whether or not you choose to be a part of a group or a tradition or a specific path. It happens because you say yes to it. And I will venture to say that each and every soul that exists will at some time or another be an initiate, because that's ultimately the will of the universe. The will of the universe is for everybody to become who they're meant to be. The free will that we have isn't so much whether or not we're going to be initiated, whether or not we're going to become who we are meant to be, but how long we delay it, how long we dally, how long we tarry. There's a lot of time wasting that we do, and that is really the extent of our free will, is how much time we're willing to waste. Initiation is not an event. It's a process, and it's nothing that can be undone, so we take it very seriously, and we tread one step in front of the other, asking that we be guided and led as we are initiated. And it's Shekinah or spirit or divine substance that is the initiator. It's through the mother that you're born again. It's through the mother that you're initiated. There's a reason why the serpent chose Eve in the garden, because it's a symbol that it's through the divine feminine that we are initiated. It's not that the mother is more important than the father or the father is more important than the mother. It's just that there's a positive pole of the battery and a negative pole. There's a masculine and a feminine. And it's through that Shekinah power, which is the feminine side of divinity, that we are initiated, that we are awakened, that we are reborn. And you can't unborn yourself. It's so important to remind yourself that once you have said yes to an initiation, that's it. You've started, and it cannot be stopped. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. But you can take your time. You can get stuck in that so-called birth canal if you want to. That's not the will of the infinite. And like I said, the Shekinah doesn't have trauma. Shekinah doesn't have labor. That's not a thing. The Shekinah is consistently giving birth. Her function is to consistently give birth. If you are willing to allow her to bring you through that birth canal, to bring you through that experience, and you trust in her, she will bring you to the other side where, like I said, you won't see the world in the same way. Other people may not notice. In fact, sometimes that's a good thing. That's why it is occult. Sometimes you just have to blend in, look like everybody else, talk like everybody else, not make waves in order for you to be the most powerful. Sometimes that's necessary. Can you imagine in World War II, people in the resistance just walked up to the soldiers and said, "Hi, I'm in the resistance." No, sometimes you have to keep quiet about things. And that's why it's occult. And so just because you're an initiate doesn't mean anybody else is going to know necessarily. In fact, it's usually better if they don't. But you will know, and the way you'll know is that you won't see the world in the same way that you used to. Of course, we all have days. But overall, if you look back at how you used to interact with things and how you saw things and what you thought things meant, it's completely new. Everything has a different light to it. Everything shimmers. Everything is magical. There is nothing that escapes the shimmering, glistening Shekinah that you're aware of at all times once you're initiated into her mysteries. And the veil between the seen and the unseen is something you have the power to operate through. You're able to lift that veil. And you live with a very thin veil. And like I said, a lot of times you have to pretend the veil's there just in order to deal with people. You can't rush other people into this. They'll have to do it in their own way at their own time. And if you try to rush people into this, there will be such a resistance that you will get attacked by them. Witch burnings, anyone? We don't necessarily want to convince other people. The occult is not about proselytizing. There's no evangelical occultism. That doesn't work. In fact, it's the opposite. You blend away. That's how the craft survived the witch burnings, is by blending into the church. And that's why there's so much authentic, traditional witchcraft and magic that seems very Christian in nature, that seems very biblical. Some of it is biblical because the Bible is occult. Some of it isn't. Some of it was propaganda. But the ability to survive sometimes requires that you wear their clothes, that you speak their language, that you don't make waves. You get more done oftentimes that way. And you definitely survive that way. Times have not changed that much. Things are better in some ways. I mean, the fact that I can even talk like this on a live stream on the internet, that's a big thing. But ultimately, what you do with your initiation in your personal life is very private, very personal. But that doesn't mean that it lacks profundity. Because once you're on the other side of that veil, once you have been born again, once you have been initiated, you can't see life the same way. You've been given your power. You've always had your power, but it's been introduced to you. Your only function then is, how can I access my power more and more and more? The way I operate, it's how can I access it for the highest good of all? Yes, for my personal needs, absolutely. But my personal needs aren't separate from the needs of the world. Now, when I use magic as an initiate, if I need money, it happens in a way that's good for other people. When I need protection, it's going to be good for other people too. It's going to contribute to the well-being of the entire world. Not because I'm planning on how can I make the world better, but because I'm operating through Shekinah and she knows how to make the world better through me, even though I won't see necessarily the results of her work through me. Once you get through to the other side, you don't have to thwart your magical abilities because you don't want to be selfish, say, or that you don't want to harm anybody. You're past all that. You're not going to harm anybody. It's not going to be anything but good for everybody because you're an initiate. You're a butterfly, not a caterpillar. You don't have to think like a caterpillar once you're an initiate. You don't have to think like a seed anymore. You're the thriving plant. You're not an egg. You're the hawk. You're not a fetus. You're the being. And it can be very hard sometimes when we're on the other side of an initiation, especially since it is very personal, to remind ourselves, I don't need to be afraid of my power. My power is here to be used. I don't see the world the way these people do anymore. Doesn't mean I'm better than them. It's not an elitist thing at all. They could see it this way if they wanted to, but they're just not ready for whatever reason. It's not my business, and it's not my place to teach them unless they're coming to me for lessons, like in this particular case. But in my life, I don't try to tell people how to see things. That never works out. It never works out. I see things the way that the Infinite wants me to see things. I see things through the eyes of the Shekinah. I see how everything is alive. I see the magic everywhere. And as a result of me being aware of the magic everywhere, I'm able to access that magic and work that magic. And to the degree that I'm willing to practice, I can create all kinds of wonderful things in my life and thus in the lives of other people around me. And they don't ever have to know how or why. Big, giant, amazing miracles happen. And the last thing I want to do is say, oh, you should see what I did. That's the death of it. Secrecy. Faith, imagination, will, and secrecy. We have a huge responsibility once we're initiated to keep our mind focused on the truth as it's revealed to us, to keep our vision on the other side of those illusions and not believe what's happening around us. Not believe what's happening around us. That's not to be irresponsible and say, oh, well, I don't believe that the gas bill is really due. That's not what we're talking about. But if we are looking at that gas bill and we used to be like, oh, how am I going to pay this? That's what we're talking about. On the other side of the initiation, there's no, I can't pay my gas bill. That doesn't exist. I have all the power I need to pay that gas bill because the gas bill isn't what I think it is. The ego used the gas bill as a way to keep me down. I don't see it that way anymore. Now I recognize it for what it is. Right? My physical health, I don't see it as the same thing anymore. It used to be, if I had a problem physically, my ego would use that as a means by which to keep me down. Now, as an initiate, I see it differently. I see it in a new way. Now, how you see it is going to be between you and Shekinah. I can't tell you what that's going to look like, but it will look different than the way it looked before your birth, before your initiation. And initiation is something that, yes, it happens, but remember, the birth is just the beginning. Initiation is the beginning. What you do with it is what's important. The initiation is important, but the path that you tread as a result of that initiation, post-initiation, you accept who you are as a soul. You don't try to go back to the old ways, because that's just your ego trying to tell you, oh, you should be afraid of your power. After you're initiated, you see things the way they are, not the way that everybody else tells you that they should be, and you are guided. You are led. You have a hotline to the infinite. You are constantly guided at every step. You don't have to worry about what to do anymore. Things can still seem scary. Of course they can. But you're not snowed by that fear like you used to be. In fact, usually you're not snowed at all. You say, yeah, this is an old fear response of mine, but I know I'm going to get through this, and I know how to get through this because I have a guide. You've always had the guide, but you've never listened to it before the initiation. Now that voice is obvious. Now that voice is clear. So when you hear about initiation, understand that that's not something that necessarily you need to do according to the systems that are being described when they're talking about initiation. Of course, you can do that. Of course, if those are legitimate paths and legitimate systems, they will bring you the same thing that we're talking about today. But if you don't have access to those paths or you're not interested in those paths, that doesn't mean that initiation isn't open to you. All you have to do is ask for it and be willing to say yes. And be willing to say yes. The act of working magic in and of itself puts you on that path of initiation. Because in order to be any good at it, you have to learn how to calm your mind, focus your mind, and have moments of silence where you're receiving guidance, where you're receiving wisdom. And that is that gestation period that it takes to be reborn, to be initiated. And the initiation happens when it does. And you'll know when it happens because you won't be able to see things the same way anymore. Things are different. And it happens very differently for everybody. For some people, it happens right away. And for other people, it's a very slow, gradual process. And everything is perfect for you. And you just have to trust that you and your guide and the Shekinah know exactly what they're doing. You don't have to direct the process, but you do have to be open to it. Just like that caterpillar can't direct the process, but it has to be willing to build the cocoon. That seed can't direct the process, but it does have to die to who it used to be in order for that vine to grow. And so do we have to die to who we used to be in order to be born into who we actually are. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I so appreciate you. Until next time, blessed be.